Welcome, listeners, to the Midnight Screen Files, a place where reality flickers like a dying signal, where the static between stations hides whispers not meant for human ears. Tonight, we tune into two strange broadcasts, one from a DJ lost between frequencies, another from a reporter who vanished chasing echoes of something he was never meant to hear. Adjust your dial and listen carefully. The missing signal. Late nights were my comfort zone. Sitting in the dim glow of the control board, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, spinning records for the sleepless and lonely. The night belonged to people like me, insomniacs, lost souls, those who found solace in the quiet hum of a radio station that felt like a friend in the dark. I had been running the graveyard shift at 104.7 FM. The Pulse, for almost 3 years. The station was small, barely scraping by, but I didn't care about the paycheck. It was about connection, about playing the perfect song at 3 a.m. that made someone, somewhere, feel like they weren't alone. I wasn't just a DJ. I was a companion to the lonely. The truckers on long-haul drives, the exhausted nurses on their cigarette breaks, the strangers whispering into their pillows, hoping for a song that made them feel something. I felt like I knew them, even though I'd never see their faces. My love for music started early. My dad had been a jazz musician, and I grew up with the crackle of old records filling our tiny apartment. He taught me that every song had a story, and somehow that idea followed me into radio. I didn't just play songs. I curated moments. When I spoke into the microphone, I imagined someone on the other end, hearing my voice like a lighthouse cutting through the fog. Maybe they were just as lost as I was. Maybe, in some way, we were saving each other. I leaned into the microphone, letting the last song fade into silence. That was Fleetwood Mac's Dreams, a classic to carry you through the night. And if you're just tuning in, welcome to another late-night session on 104.7 FM, The Pulse. Your home for music, memories, and good vibes for all who need them. Whether you're driving, working, or just staring at the ceiling, you're not alone. Let's keep the night going. Then the calls started. At first, they seemed normal. Requests for classic rock, late-night dedications, the occasional weirdo asking if I believed in UFOs. But then I noticed something off. The same voices called night after night, asking for songs I had already played, telling stories about places I'd been, people I'd known, memories I had never shared on air. One night, around 2:43 a.m., I got a call from an elderly woman. The line crackled, and for a moment I thought it was just interference. Then, a frail, quivering voice broke through the static. "You used to visit your grandmother every summer, didn't you? You always brought her lilacs." I frowned. I had never mentioned my grandmother on the show. "Ma'am, do I know you?" I asked, forcing a laugh, trying to keep the unease from creeping into my voice. There was a long pause, the kind that stretched just a second too long, making my skin crawl. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I tried again. Another pause. Then, she continued as if I hadn't spoken at all. "She always said you had kind eyes. You would sit by her window and read to her when she got too sick to walk. She was so proud of you." My fingers curled around the microphone. "Who are you? How do you know this?" More static than a whisper, distant but clear. "We just want you to come back." The line went dead. Something cold settled in my chest. I told myself it was just a prank. Maybe an old friend playing a joke. But when I checked the caller ID, the number was blank. Not unknown. Just missing. The next night, I got another call. A young man this time. His voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Hey man, you gotta wake up. You don't belong here." I sat up, gripping the mic. "What did you just say? Who is this?" The static hissed, and for a moment I thought the call had dropped. Then the voice returned, more insistent. "This place, it's not real. You need to come back before it's too late." "What are you talking about?" My fingers curled tighter around the desk. "Come back from where? Who are you?" More static. Then the voice resumed, completely ignoring my questions. "It's getting harder to reach you. You have to listen. You have to wake up. Wake up? My voice cracked slightly. I'm awake. I'm right here. Please wake up. The static surged, swallowing his words. The line went dead. My skin prickled. I stared at the soundboard, my reflection barely visible in the window beyond. Something about my own face looked off. Like I wasn't supposed to be here. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temples. The tension had settled deep into my shoulders, an unease that I couldn't shake. I needed a break. Grabbing my pack of cigarettes from the desk, I pushed back from my chair and stepped outside into the cool night air. The alley behind the station was dimly lit by a flickering street lamp, casting long, jagged shadows against the walls. I took a slow drag, feeling the smoke curl in my lungs before releasing it into the night. The familiar ritual should have calmed me, but it didn't. Something felt off. The street was too quiet. Normally I'd hear distant traffic, the occasional drunk stumbling home, or the hum of the city even at this hour. But tonight, there was only silence, heavy and unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. I glanced around. The air felt thick, pressing in on me. When was the last time I actually saw someone in person? The thought struck me like a cold slap. I racked my brain, trying to recall my last real conversation outside of the station, but nothing came. It was as if the world outside my late-night broadcasts had blurred into nothingness. The sense of isolation hit hard. I had always been a night owl, living on the fringes of normal hours, but this was different. It felt like I was the only person left in the city. The cigarette burned down between my fingers, and I barely noticed. Something wasn't right. I crushed the butt beneath my shoe and stepped back inside. I tried tracing the calls the next day, but there were no records. The station's logs showed nothing. It was as if I had imagined the whole thing, except I hadn't. The next night, the calls continued. Familiar voices. A childhood friend I hadn't spoken to in years. People I knew, but none of them should have been listening. Then I heard her. "Chris, it's me. Can you hear me?" My breath caught in my throat. "Mom?" Her voice wavered, thick with emotion. "Sweetheart, please. We've been trying to reach you. You need to come back." A cold sweat broke across my skin. "Come back from where?" "Mom, I don't understand. What's happening?" Static crackled on the line, but through it I heard her sigh, a sound so familiar, so painfully real, that it sent a deep ache through my chest. "You've been gone too long, honey. It's time to wake up." Something inside me twisted. A sense of overwhelming wrongness settled deep in my gut. I tried to remember what day it was, the last time I left the station, the last time I saw someone in person. But the memories slipped through my fingers like sand. I couldn't remember going home in the morning. Had I even left the studio? Had I slept? Had I eaten? Had my life become an endless loop of spinning records and taking calls from voices that shouldn't exist? "Mom," I whispered, pressing a hand to my forehead. I don't know what's real anymore." The static surged, swallowing her voice, but just before it did, I heard her say, "Follow my voice, sweetheart. Just follow my voice." The static rose, deafening. The control board flickered. The entire studio shuddered as if the world itself was breaking apart. I ran. The exit door flew open into blinding white light. My vision blurred, the static filling my head, a roaring wave of sound swallowing me whole. Then nothing. I woke up to beeping, a rhythmic pulse. The hum of hospital machinery, the sterile scent of antiseptic filled my nose. My body felt heavy, like I had been asleep for ages. I wasn't in the radio station anymore. I blinked, disoriented, my throat dry. A voice murmured my name. "Chris." "Oh my God, Chris, you're awake." I turned my head and saw Mark, my best friend, eyes red-rimmed, gripping my arm. Next to him was Sarah, my ex, looking like she'd been crying for days. "Where?" My voice cracked. "Where am I?" "You've been in a coma for 2 months, Mark said, squeezing my hand. "You crashed your bike on the highway. You've been unconscious ever since." I tried to sit up, my head spinning. 2 months? The memories of the station, the calls, the static, they had felt real. "But I was at work," I whispered. "I was on air. I was getting calls. From you, from all of you." Sarah let out a shaky breath. Chris, we were talking to you. Her fingers curled against the hospital blanket. Every night, we came and sat by your bed. We talked to you, begged you to wake up. Your mom just left. I have to let her know you're awake. We just wanted you to come back, Mark added quietly. The words hit me like a thunderclap. I had heard them before. We just want you to come back. The voices weren't coming from the radio. They had never been on the air. They had been here, by my side, calling me home, and somehow, someway, I had finally listened. The last thing I heard was static. I never considered myself the superstitious type. Ghost stories were just that, stories. But something about this case felt different. It started like any other missing persons report. A routine investigation, a few names, locations, possible connections. Except this one had no leads, no forced entries, no signs of struggle, and no bodies. Just vanished people, and in every case, a tape recorder left behind. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm a journalist, the kind that doesn't make a lot of friends. I dig too deep, ask too many questions, and sometimes I find things people don't want to be found. This case landed on my desk after the fourth disappearance. At first, I thought it was just bad police work, a missing pattern the department didn't care to acknowledge. But when I started looking into the missing persons, the case became something else entirely. Each missing person had an eerily similar background. None of them were connected in any obvious way, no shared workplaces, no overlapping social circles. But they all had one thing in common. They were all investigating something before they disappeared. The first was Miriam Hall, a history professor at a small university. She had been researching local urban legends and unexplained disappearances throughout the past century. Notes recovered from her apartment detailed a theory about a recurring vanishing pattern every 20 years. Her last recorded entry? It always starts with static. Then there was David Brooks, a school teacher with a keen interest in audio phenomena and EVP recordings. According to his family, David had been obsessed with a particular radio frequency that only broadcasted static. Except sometimes late at night, he swore he heard voices in it. His friends thought he was losing it, but in his apartment, they found a wall covered in transcriptions of whispers recorded on various nights. The last one said, "We've been waiting for you." The third disappearance was Monica Reyes, a private investigator hired by a grieving mother who believed her son hadn't just run away. Monica's notes were more frantic, detailing her paranoia. "They know I'm listening." Before she vanished, she left behind a final voicemail to a friend. "I keep hearing my own voice on the tapes, but I never recorded those words." And then there was Aaron Fields, an audio engineer who had reportedly been working on restoring a set of old tapes he had found at a flea market. He never specified what was on them, just that some were wrong. His last call to his sister ended abruptly with static. When police arrived at his apartment, the only thing playing on his laptop was a slowed-down recording of his own voice, saying, "It's beautiful here." Each missing person left behind a single tape recorder, sitting perfectly on their desks or kitchen counters, waiting to be discovered. The cops barely touched them, dismissing them as irrelevant. But I knew better. I tracked down the families, asked the right questions, and finally convinced one of the detectives to let me borrow a tape. The night I took it home, it sat on my desk for hours before I finally built up the nerve to press play. At first, it was nothing but static, a harsh, white noise that filled the quiet of my apartment. I adjusted the volume, leaned in, then, just barely beneath the static, I heard it. A whisper. My name. I stopped the tape, my breath hitched. I replayed the section, rewound, listened again. The whisper was there, faint, almost like an exhale. I checked my notes. None of the missing people knew me. I had no connection to them beyond this investigation. It had to be a trick of the sound. My mind filling in the blanks, I pressed play again. The static continued, shifting like an untuned radio. Then the voices came. David Brooks' voice came first, steady and reassuring. I used to be afraid, but not anymore. The static, it was calling me home. Miriam Hall's voice followed, warm and thoughtful. I spent years searching for the truth, trying to understand what happened to those before us. But I never imagined I would be here myself. And now that I am, I wouldn't leave, even if I could. It's peaceful, Monica Reyes whispered. No fear, no pain. Everything makes sense here. I see everything so clearly now. Then Aaron Fields spoke, his voice carrying a quiet awe. I always thought I was repairing something broken when I worked on those tapes. But the truth is, I was uncovering something meant to be heard. I was unlocking the door. The voices layered over each other, overlapping, urging, inviting. We were lost, but now we're found. Come and see. It's beautiful here. My fingers hovered over the stop button, but I didn't press it. The voices continued, overlapping, beckoning. We were lost, but now we're found. Come and see. It's beautiful here. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I turned off the recorder, heart pounding. The apartment felt different now, too quiet, like the air had thickened around me. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard it. Static. I turned sharply. The radio was off, the TV silent. But the static was there, whispering at the edges of the room. The tape recorder clicked. It had rewound on its own. My fingers trembled as I pressed play again. Join us. The whisper came from behind me this time. I spun around, but the room was empty. My breath came shallow and fast. I fumbled for my phone, my bag, my keys, anything that would get me out of here. The tape recorder clicked again. The static grew louder, filling my skull, my thoughts, drowning out everything else. I grabbed the recorder and turned it over in my hands, inspecting it for anything unusual. There was nothing. No external power source, no mechanism that should make it act this way. And yet, it clicked again. The static shifted, forming words that were now undeniable. You're so close now. I dropped the recorder onto the desk and staggered back. My apartment had always felt like a safe place, but now, standing there in the dim light, it felt foreign, like I had walked into someone else's home. I looked at my notes again, flipping through the pages, searching for something, anything that would tell me what was happening. The names and faces of the missing stared back at me, their eyes hollow, their smiles frozen in time. Then I saw it, a handwritten note scrawled in the margins of one of the reports. Do not listen to the end of the tape. My blood ran cold. I pressed play. The voices returned immediately. No static this time, just whispers, overlapping, calling me. Come and see. It's beautiful here. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the edge of the desk. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the voices, but they grew stronger, clearer. You're almost there. Then silence. I opened my eyes. The apartment was gone. I stood in a vast, empty landscape, a sky stretching infinitely above me. A pale sun cast long shadows over the rolling hills, and in the distance I saw them, the missing. They stood together, smiling, their eyes bright and expectant. They reached out their hands. We knew you'd come. I took a step forward, then another. My body felt light, as if gravity no longer held me the same way. Then I heard the static again. But this time, it wasn't from the tape recorder. It was inside my head. The last thing I heard was my own voice whispering, "It's beautiful here." The next morning, my apartment was empty. My phone sat untouched on the table. The case files lay open, a half-finished cup of coffee cold beside them. The only thing out of place was the tape recorder. A new cassette sat inside. A detective pressed play. Static. Then just beneath it, his name. Some signals are never meant to be found. Some voices should have remained lost in the static. And yet, once you've heard them, they never really leave you. Thank you for listening to the Midnight Screen Files. Until next time, keep your radio tuned and your ears open.